Hi, I'm Trevor Tierney, Integrated Success Coach here at UK, and today I'm going to talk to you about spaced repetition theory and how you can use it to study more efficiently and effectively. This should also highlight why cramming the night before an exam usually won't produce the results you're looking for. Spaced repetition is a learning technique that involves reviewing information at increasing intervals over time. This helps to ensure that the information is stored in your long-term memory rather than only staying in your short-term or working memory before eventually being forgotten. Spaced repetition has a number of benefits, including increased long-term memory retention, improved recall of information, reduced study time, and increased motivation to study. To understand how to utilize spaced repetition, we must first understand something called the forgetting curve. So this is a graph that represents how much information you remember over time if you do nothing to study or review that material. It was initially popularized by a German scientist named Hermann Ebbinghaus. So as you can see here, we have time on the bottom, or x-axis, and on the y-axis we have retention, or how much information your brain can retain or remember. So as you can see, as time goes on, we tend to forget more and more of what we've learned. Even just one day after we've learned something, we've typically forgotten around 50% of it. By 3 days out, we're close to 20% retention, and by a week out, we're down to around 10%. I encourage you to think back to something you learned last week and see how much of it you can remember. You might be able to recall the main idea, but I'd guess that many of the specific details have probably faded away. So what does this tell us about studying? Well, without understanding the forgetting curve, or spaced repetition, which I'll show you next, many students will learn something new, wait to review it until a few days before the exam, then try to study hard within those few days to remember the material again. This means that we're essentially learning, forgetting, and then relearning that information over time. This approach is inefficient and actually requires us to put in more time and effort into studying than we might need to. So let's look at a different way of doing things, spaced repetition. On the dotted line here, we can see the original forgetting curve we just looked at. The bold line, however, shows us what our studying could look like if we followed spaced repetition theory. As you can see, we learn something new, but as soon as we start to forget the significant amount of that information, we engage in a short review session to cover the material again and get our retention back up to 100%. As time goes on, we'll again start to forget, so once we reach that point of 50% retention, we again need to engage in another short review session. As the information becomes more familiar and we understand it more deeply, we can actually increase the amount of time between each review session. Let's say this green line on the far right is about 3 days out from a test. The person who followed spaced repetition theory only needs to do another small review session to remember the material again fully. The person who waited until 3 days out to start studying now has to work very hard and spend much more time to attain that same level of retention. This clearly demonstrates why following the spaced repetition, or little and often approach, is much better than cramming a few days before an exam. A few key points to remember though. One is that active review sessions can be short, maybe 15 to 45 minutes, or only as long as they need to be to get that retention back up to 100%. This means that we can be more easily motivated to study because it won't be the case that we have to get ourselves to focus for hours on end. We just need to convince ourselves to study for a few minutes. 2, the type of studying you do here really matters. Take a look at our other videos on active retrieval and mind mapping to find out some of the best strategies to use in those review sessions. 3, and this is very important, this graph only represents learning something, singular. So let's say this only shows what's happening to the information from one topic or one day of lecture. This means that we need to manage multiple curves simultaneously. To do that, we recommend creating some kind of a tracking system to take account of each topic or day of lecture you'll need to know for your exam, how well you feel like you know or remember that material, and when you reviewed it. Take a look at this Excel sheet we've put together as an example. Consider planning out your studying with an Excel sheet like this, a calendar, or whatever system works best for you. There are plenty of apps to explore that have spaced repetition theory built in, so check those out as well. As always, if you have any questions about this or need any help making it work for you, come see us in an individual coaching appointment and we would be more than happy to help. Thanks and happy studying.